for coming. Some of you know me. I am Joya Polidori. I'm the Vice President of the Dornsife Faculty Council. And the Dornsife Faculty Council, together with the Dean's Office, we've organized this event. It's sponsored by the Dean's Office. And we have today our Dean of Undergraduate Education, Dean Stott. We have the former Director of the Writing Program, John Holland. And we have Reynolds, who is the Senior I lost it. Appointment, promotion, and tenure coordinator for Dornsife. So she will be able to answer technical questions. And I guess I'll let you guys go over your introduction, and then we'll be able to take questions afterwards.
Great, thank you. So, so my name's Andy Stott. I'm the College Dean of Undergraduate Education and a Professor of English. And I'm the Cognizant Dean for RTPC Faculty Affairs in Dornsife, and have played a very involved role in everything to do with RTPC appointment and promotion in the nearly 2.5 years since I've been here. Perhaps the biggest amount of work I've done is related to the process and the structure of RTPC appointment and promotion. And so I thought I'd say a little bit about that before sort of going down the line. And then we thought, the three of us thought that probably the best thing to do is really leave as much time as possible for just discussion and questions, because I'm sure you have many. So let's begin with the process. So before I got here, the RTPC appointment and promotion process was based on a set of guidelines that had been approved, I think, in 2013. And essentially, you know, what I did when I got here was we revised these, and they came into effect this academic year. So the ones that have been handed out to you are the RTPC promotion guidelines that we revised in 2018, or the sort of academic year 2018-19, were approved in the spring of 2019 and are now in effect. And so we're in this rather sort of unique position right now where we have two sets of promotion guidelines, the old and the new, or the former and the current, but let's call them old and new, that seems easier. And people who are considering going up for promotion can use either if they were hired prior to the adoption of the new guidelines, right? So anybody who was hired prior to this fall on the RTPC track is grandfathered in and gets to use the old ones if they prefer, or the new ones if they prefer. The only thing we ask is that you tell us when you're submitting your dossier for promotion which guidelines you're going up under, so that we can assess and evaluate accordingly. Okay? Now, there's a difference between the two, although I think the difference is really about the kind of dossier that you submit, and we've changed some of the language, but in substance, the requirements for promotion pretty much are pretty much the same. I'd say 90% the same. But in the new ones, what we've asked for is people, instead of their dossier being really the aggregate of every document they've ever generated in the course of their employment here at USC, with some letters and memos stuck on top and then submitted to us, what we've asked for is a dossier that narrates the career and alludes to, if you like, artifacts or illustrations of the points that the candidate would really like to highlight for the consideration of the committee, right? So in the current, or rather in the previous format, you know, every single student evaluation would be included, every single syllabus would be included, every, you know, sort of letter or anything like that would be included, and it really just became this undifferentiated morass of paper, right? Not very easy to read and not very easy to get a really good three-dimensional sense of who the candidate was and what his or her contributions were on the practice, teaching, or research track. The new dossier, and we've handed out the requirements here, and you can see how we've kind of enumerated that, really asks for a kind of narrative very similar to the idea of a kind of teaching statement. Who you are, what's your philosophy, what have you done in the classroom, and now show us the documents or the evidence that back that up. Okay, so it's much more like a kind of curated portfolio of works with a narrative that coheres it and brings it all together and integrates it for us so that we understand who you are, what your philosophy is, and what your contributions have been, right? Now, you might say, I've been the most popular teacher in this particular section, okay? So then there's an evidence from the student evaluations. You might say, I've innovated this syllabus every year I've taught it, and demonstrate evidence. You might say, I've used this pedagogical tool on a number of different occasions. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. That's fine, right? Because we want to show you growing in your job, growing in your profession, right? I tried something, it didn't work, as reflected perhaps even in the student evaluations, but I learned from that, I retooled my syllabus accordingly, and I did it differently this time. Right? I think that would be a really good example of, you know, making a positive potentially out of a negative, because in the current dossier form, you've just, or I'm sorry, I keep meaning the old dossier form, you've got those negatives just kind of build these geological layers, right? But in the new one, you can actually address it head on and sort of turn it into something that you would like us to reflect upon as a committee as we evaluate your submission. So everything is set out in the guidelines, so I'm not really going to go through those, but I'd be very happy to answer questions in relation to it. There is no preference for us as a committee evaluating these dossiers, whether you go up on the old or the new. We think the new are better, but there's no penalty on going up on the old. Okay, I want to make that really clear. So don't feel just because there are new ones there, anyone who goes up on the old is somehow going to get, you know, an inferior assessment. That's not true at all. We just want to know which one you're going up on, so we can evaluate you against the benchmarks as written in the appropriate document, and not get confused as to what's going on in the submission. Now, in terms of the process, so everybody who is considering going up should have a conversation, a very honest conversation with their faculty mentor in their department. If you don't have one, you should really, but that's not your fault if you don't have one. If you don't have one, you should talk to the chair of your department, and you should ask him or her to make sure they've read the guidelines, whichever ones you want to go up on, before you have a meeting, and then have a meeting to get them to give their honest assessment as to whether or not you're ready. Okay, mentorship is all important, and this is a peer assessment and evaluation, just as in the tenure process. So number of years served is not an indication of whether or not you are ready, right? We have recommendations as to the minimum number of years that it takes usually somebody to acquire the various accomplishments that we consider appropriate for somebody seeking a particular title, but just having served those years is no guarantee that you will have accumulated the relative accomplishments or demonstrated everything we need to see for promotion, right? So have that honest conversation. Be prepared for a candid conversation, and a conversation that's potentially difficult, because unlike tenure, which is up or out, RTPC promotions, you can just keep going, right? As long as your contract is renewed, you can apply for promotion at any time that your department is ready to support your application, right? So I mean, okay, sure, you may have been in title or in rank for a certain amount of time and you think you're ready to go up. If somebody tells you and you think it's been a fair and candid conversation that they would prefer that you waited another year to do a couple more things, take that on board, because it's not like you're going to get kicked out of the institution because you didn't get tenure, right? You just need to make sure you're ready. Our approval rate, that is the number of people who submit for promotion and are successful in their application, is currently 93%, right? So it's very high, and that, I think, is testament to the fact not only that we have wonderful people on the RTPC track who have manifold accomplishments, but also that they've had that discussion and that they make sure they're ready. And some departments do this incredibly well. Writing program, shout out to you guys. right? Others have maybe not had that conversation when they needed to, and that accounts for the 7% of people who haven't been successful. Not that these are people who won't be successful, they will, I'm confident of that. It's just that they haven't really had the conversations or the mentoring necessary to get their dossiers ready. Okay, so once the dossier is submitted, and the dossier is submitted on, I think, December 13th, is that correct?
For this year.
Yeah, for this year, December 13th. It will then go forward to what we call the DCAP RTPC, which stands for the Dornsife Committee on Appointments and Promotions / RTPC. So this is, again, one of the things I set up when I got here. It used to be that dossiers were reviewed by ad hoc committees of the willing, who were composed anew every time there was a series of dossiers to consider. What I want to do is put it on a more kind of permanent and consistent footing, which means that we now have committee members who serve terms. Okay, now obviously confidentiality, as with all these things, means that these people's names are not public and won't be until their terms of service are concluded, as with the tenure process. But what it allows us to do is build up institutional knowledge and consistency and make sure there is parity and equity in the assessment of all the dossiers so that everybody knows what like for like looks like, and we're getting a really good, consistent, informed and professional view of all of the dossiers as they come before us. So DCAP RTPC meets every Wednesday afternoon in the spring semester, and we usually look at somewhere between 4 or 5 dossiers at a time, and last year we did 40. So it's a considerable amount of work, and all of those get a really thorough reading by informed individuals who work hard on these dossiers. So that means that when you do get promoted, you know that it's been a really substantive and meaningful process, so you should feel good about that. And if you don't get promoted, it means that there's nothing capricious about it, right? It's been, again, a substantive process of peer review. Plus, I should add, for those dossiers that are not successful, I send every single one up to the Provost's office, to the Senior Vice Provost for Faculty Affairs, Elizabeth Grady, for a third review, okay? So I just want to make sure that what the committee has seen can be verified once again, because I make myself available for a conversation with everybody who is denied promotion under the RTPC promotion guidelines, if they want it, so that we can have an honest conversation about where the deficiencies or questions lay, and that they can know also that this has been reviewed at multiple levels across the university to make sure that no unfair standard has been applied or there has basically been a mistake, right? So far, of the cases I've sent forward, all have been upheld with the exception of one, which was reversed. So it works. It's a process that works. I think that's about all I'm going to say right now, but the last thing I would say is about the dossier, is I think for those of you who are interested in going up under the new guidelines, really start thinking about what those artifacts are, what those pieces of evidence are that represent you best as a teacher or a practitioner or as a researcher, and think about, sort of building that case right away, and every time you do something, put it in a file, right, and keep accumulating that, because if you're not going up now, you're going up another time, or you're going up for you've recently become assistant but you want to go up for associate. Start building that file immediately, and always have it on the go, so that you don't just have to rack your brains for evidence one night the day before it's due or something like that, and sort of sell yourself short because you haven't remembered all of the great things you've done. John.
Thank you. I'll just be brief. A couple of things I want to mention is another, I think, real improvement in the new guidelines has to do with the nature of the referee letters. I think referee letters for people who are in research are of a kind that you can see how you can submit work that has been done in the lab or something to outside sources and it's reviewed accordingly. When teaching is the heart of what you're doing, I think it becomes a little bit more difficult to figure out how to get those arm's length letters. And I think the deans have done a remarkable job of identifying ways to allow this to happen so that it's fairer and that it's also much more attuned to who you really are as a teacher. And so as you will see, when you're going up for assistant professor, that first step after you come in as a lecturer, you really can get all of your letters internally, because one of the 2 teaching letters that occurs at every single, teaching reference letters that occurs at every single promotional opportunity is one that actually comes anonymously from within your department, where we have somebody who really knows the teaching that goes on there, who could study the outcomes of your courses, who could look at the syllabi and stuff like that, and could provide a reference letter, a truly knowledgeable reference letter that comes from within the context of where the teaching is going on. At the assistant level, a second letter can still be a second class observation or a third class observation. So when you've only been here a couple of years, and we don't want you reaching out to letters that have no import. I think, for example, among other things, the letter from somebody who was on your dissertation committee, which has little to do with who you are as a teacher and your effectiveness as a teacher in this level, that's the type of thing that I think the deans found not very helpful in terms of assessing who you are as a teacher during this process. Now when you're going forward to assistant, you can gather together letters that are really about what you are doing as a teacher. And again, this will continue up the ranks. Again, as you go for associate, and finally as you go for full professor, other criteria come into being. The nature of your service, the nature of your leadership, the nature of your impact on the profession. These types of things become much more important as you grow, and therefore the letters will have more of a referee effect and will oftentimes come from outside. But the core teaching letters, I think, have been much better defined to allow you the opportunity to really have people who are expert on the teaching at this institution in your department be commentators when it comes to looking at that process. The other thing I want to emphasize is something that Andy has emphasized, is telling your story. Again, that story grows as you continue here. You should be very aware that I think when committees are formed, they're looking for your growth after the last promotion, although that growth certainly is cumulative. And so after you get to assistant, you need to realize that the criteria as specified here do become more, I don't want to say more rigorous, because teaching is a rigorous criteria in itself, but they become a little bit more expanded. Yeah, as you move towards the associate rank, and certainly more expanded as you attempt the full professor rank. And again, I think a very wise thing, and I think Andy was behind it, and I know our Dean Amber was behind it as well, was to look at impact. I think we were a little bit worried, and there are certainly people in the RTPC track who have remarkable publication records, and that is certainly something that counts. But I think that they wanted to be sure that it wasn't just publication becoming the sole criteria, or a criteria as it is in tenure. They wanted to differentiate that there are many ways to have impact within the profession. There are many ways to influence the institution, to have impact as a teacher, to be involved with professional organizations that have that type of impact. And I think they wanted to really reward that, and so as you move forward, I think you can see by the criteria that it's much more inclusive in terms of the types of things you will present, but it's still rigorous. You need to really establish that identity as you're going through, progressively. As you move from assistant to associate, you need somebody, the way I put it is if, one of my teachers came up to me when I was director of the writing program, I'd be able readily to identify the niche, the very important teaching niche and the very important professional niche that person had. And you want people to be able to say that. Oh, this is that person who is doing remarkable work in community service and improving teaching at the institution through that type of work. Here's that person who is doing remarkable research on pedagogical impact of certain types of teaching. You get what I'm saying. You want to make sure that that identity is emerging stronger and stronger as you move along, so that by the time you're going for professor, there's absolutely no doubt about what the impact is that you've had as a teacher and as a professional and in service for the institution. So that's, I'll invite questions later. I think, do you want to say anything at this point?
Just a brief reminder that the dossiers for this academic year are due December 13th, and every following year it's always going to be the second Friday of the month of December for when they're due. And just as another reminder, faculty affairs is available to all faculty and departments as you're preparing the dossier throughout the whole process. So from the initial starting and asking if there are any questions throughout any of the process, or if you want to meet with faculty affairs to go answer any questions of any of the paperwork you have or of any deadlines or timelines, just reach out to us and let us know.
So is that a good time to throw it open for questions? I mean, that leaves them plenty of time, so why don't we go ahead? Hi.
You said there is an option to go with old criteria or new criteria for people who are hired prior to the approval of the new criteria. Does it apply to next year or the following year? Or
Yeah, so you're grandfathered in. So, so if you were, the only people who cannot go up under different ones are people who are hired this year and moving forward. They're always under the new guidelines. Anyone hired prior to fall 19 can choose.
My guess is that most people will find that the new guidelines are really clarifications and expansions on what was already sort of expected in the old promotional process. You know, again, the referee letters and things like that have changed a bit, as are the expectations, the inclusive expectations for what counts for moving forward. But I bet that the decision won't be that hard, but take a careful look at it.
Yeah. At the back there.
I was wondering, I don't know if this is clearly articulated in the guidelines or not, but the merit evaluation process sometimes feels a bit like going up for a promotion, even though it isn't. But I was wondering if there's a sort of an explicit relationship between these two things.
Well, there's an explicit relationship in as much as merit evaluations are reported in the dossier. We're actually going to take a Dornsife-wide look at merit evaluations and how we do that moving forward. So, I mean, it's an important part, you know. I mean, if there was some kind of disconnect or dissonance between what your merit reviews say and what the dossier says, then the committee's going to have questions about that. But above and beyond anything like that, you know, some sort of obvious discontinuity, it's really the dossier that has the most important factor. I think that given everything that's happened across USC with the peer evaluation of teaching and with various other different elements that have been introduced into the mix, our merit review more generally needs to we need to take an intelligent look at it. And I'm not sure we've had the time or the bandwidth to do that, but that's will be coming. So basically, don't worry about it too much. The dossier is the important thing.
I would guess that in the future too, that merit review might not morph, but become a little bit more like, you know, a practice in terms of teaching statements and things like that for what is expected, particularly for RTPC faculty. You know, again, tenured faculty have different requirements and they're different, but again, I think it's a good departmental practice to sort of, you know, model this type of promotional structure in the merit review. But that'll evolve, I think.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, I have a question regarding for basic languages.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm in French, I'm the director of the French program. We've had a number of new hires in the past few years. The job description that gets posted on the USC website and that we hire requires an MA.
Mm-hmm.
And it specifies that it's for teaching basic languages, which is French 1, 2, and 3, which is what we want. And so in the interview process, we also really want to make sure that the people that we hire are passionate about teaching. They teach 3 courses a semester, semester after semester, and that's something that they really love to do. However, there's in the new guidelines, going up to assistant or senior lecturer, they're the same criteria for both. It says furthers the department's curricular and pedagogical goals and needs through thoughtful course and assignment design. So we've had people in the previous guidelines that were able to present what they do as activities in class. But these are courses that they don't design. So there's no actual course design that they can bring through. It's how they teach the course, there's activities. And so it seems, I know to one person it was suggested that the person could propose maybe GSEMs and A-masters. But first of all, if you have an MA, you can't do a GSEM. And then if the person is going to, or faculty in basic languages are going to start teaching GSEMs, we're going to have to hire more faculty to fill the courses that are not being taught because they're teaching GSEMs.
So before we go too far down this road and we've you know built an entirely new university around it, so we're fully aware of this. You know, basic languages and some science sequences can be very prescriptive in terms of the syllabus and you know what the students are required to do, and junior RTPC especially tend to be handed a prefabricated suite of classes and told to teach those with little room for innovation. So we're fully aware of that. And plenty of people, because the basic languages are so big, come through this and have been very successfully promoted with no problem whatsoever. I think colleagues in that position have got a couple of things that they can do. First, they need to contextualize for us, right? So the narrative provides them with an opportunity to be quite explicit about the lengths to which they have the room for innovation or not. I mean, if the syllabus is fairly prescriptive and the sequence is prescriptive, then tell us and we will be able to understand. But then in addition to that, there are other forms, other ways in which people can get involved and sort of show a little bit of their personality, whether it be, taking on a role in organizing some kind of student club, or, in that small percentage of the syllabus that does allow for room for innovation, showing that they've been very thoughtful about what they do with that in terms of, that discretionary amount. Because, most syllabi do have some small discretionary element within them, and just make sure that we're aware, right? I mean, that's one of the great things about having a standing committee now, is that people are aware, and I don't need to explain it every week to a new bunch of people. So just contextualization is everything, because every different discipline has a different demand of one kind or another. So yeah, it really won't be any hindrance for them whatsoever.
And also keep in mind that people have to broaden their definition of what counts as teaching as well. I mean, mentoring of all types, and I think the mentoring culture will become more and more important among RTPC groups, over the years. That taking a new teacher under, bringing them in and helping them through a process, inventing different ways to present basic material in ways that inspires and engages students and things like that. There are so many ways that I know language teachers are constantly engaging students in ways that make the students much better learners with much better outcomes. Those things count, and so even if they're not actively designing courses, they are actively involved with students, and that's the crucial moment.
That's a really good way to put it. Yeah. Hi.
I have a couple questions about the Professors of Practice track, because it's constantly underdetermined everywhere. And I understand the logic of underdetermining it because it's a very, very broad field, so you can practice in a lot of different ways. The question is, how do I go about the process of nailing it down, where the research and the teaching is very detailed on what you need to do to get promotion and what the dossier needs to look like. The practice is less defined. I just work with my mentor, and they work with, how does that work?
Yeah. Well, it's a similar kind of thing in as much as we need you to contextualize why you're a professor of the practice instead of on the research track or the teaching track, because it does have a certain vagueness to it, which is, I guess, an artful way of leaving this additional space in the instructional ranks, right, in which people can do a variety of different interesting things. So I think, sort of narrating what you understand by that. Then in terms of the teaching piece, you follow the teaching practice, and then you augment that with whatever it is you do. I think the best way to think about it is, how does your practice infuse what you do in the classroom and vice versa, right? And if you can show some kind of synergy between that, because presumably, some element of that is the basis on which you've been hired into that track, that's the best way to kind of articulate it for the committee.
Hi, I'm Andrea Vada. I'm from Latin American and Iberian cultures. And I'm just wondering if the chairs are given like a calendar or any kind of training as to how to organize the whole process, because I think we've had problems in our department this year because the whole process got organized late, and some of the referees apparently said initially that they didn't want to write a letter because the turnaround time was too short. And then also, is there any recourse for faculty members who feel like they're ready to go up for promotion, but the chair decides they're not? And finally, is there any consideration of possibly moving the submission of the dossier to the spring, and then having, if we're going to be sharing our materials with referees, giving them more time to review those materials?
Okay. So the first one, in terms of the organisation and the department, well, for Latin American and Iberian cultures, we've tried very hard to take some of the pressure off the department with the formation of faculty evaluation committees by bringing somebody in from the outside to serve as a tenure track or a tenured professor there who can assist. And you know, I'm sorry if there's been issues with internal organisation. I can help with that if I'm aware, but you know, the department should be able to run themselves, and if they can't, then I need to know about that. What was the second thing?
Is there a
calendar?
Yes, there is a calendar by which things need to be done.
It's a general overview. All deadlines are assigned by the actual departments, but they do have a kind of general overview of when they should expect to do each step that's provided. But it's for them to use as a guide. It's not the determining factor of when they should do things, because that's all up to the department themselves.
Right. And then the other one was, is there recourse? Well, I think obviously you need the support of your department to go up, right? Well, an individual needs the support of his, her, or their department in order to go up. Now, if it seems that the candidate or the applicant feels that they are ready, and this is not an opinion that's shared by the chair, then I think Faculty Affairs and I would be very willing to have a conversation with that individual and see if we can mediate some kind of understanding between the department and the applicant, but ultimately the chair has to support. Because this, you know, this is Faculty Affairs, it's a process of peer review. We in the Dean's office and in Dornsife Faculty Affairs, we really support stuff, right? This is about peers evaluating peers and rank-on-rank assessment. And I can't overrule the faculty on this.
There was a fourth question about moving the date from fall.
Oh yeah, so I think that would be really difficult for us to manage the volume, because we meet every Wednesday beginning in January as it is. So I don't know how we would get through the volume of promotions by graduation. If we were doing 10, it would be fine.
But I'm sorry, exactly understand.
So the dossiers are due December 13th. We begin reviewing them around January 10th.
Right.
Right. So we really need the whole semester to get through all of the
Right,
things.
I'm saying the spring before. I'm saying start submitting this next spring for the following fall promotion.
Oh, right.
So
Okay,
that
I see.
if you
Sorry,
are-
didn't understand that.
Right. Because usually, I mean, it depends on how many materials are shared and that sort of thing. I mean, I've done some external reviews for other institutions, and they send me their dossiers, you know, over the summer, and then they give me a deadline of October 1st, for instance.
I mean, that's a possibility. I think probably for junior faculty who are moving from lecturer to assistant and so on and so forth, you want to give them the maximum amount of semesters to accumulate materials, right, including student evaluations. So if they're not in the dossier, you're really going to, the committee's probably going to want people to wait an additional year to accumulate everything they can, rather than just base their assessment on what would essentially be, you know, 2.5 years.
But for someone who's going up for full, for instance, who has...
Yeah, we could certainly begin that process earlier if there was confidence that, you know, the recommended 12 years was there and the, you know, the accumulated material. Then I think, yeah, we could certainly consider something like that. I'd be open to that. I think for the junior faculty, you've got to give them as much opportunity to accumulate the dossier material as possible. But we could look into that, couldn't we? Do you see any issues, Kat?
Well, for the 4 promotions, they're in the spring, so then we could try to get anyone who's promoted to get their new salary by the next academic year, which starts on the August 16th. But Vice Provost asked for all the information of who's promoted by the end of spring in order for us to get the salary letters out. So, which is why we have it due in the fall. So then anyone who's promoted that spring will be able to receive their additional compensation starting in August when they receive it. In regards to starting the process earlier, like a year ahead or any time, it doesn't have to start in the spring. if you wanted to speak to your departments in the fall, like say this year, in hopes of going up for next fall, you're obviously able to do so, and then you could start that process earlier.
Right, but as far as like sharing materials and contacting referees, could that also start
Yeah, that could
earlier?
also, so if you discuss in the fall, we could always start that in the spring.
Okay.
It's just the dossier, the only deadline would be the dossier itself has to be due in that fall.
So in some respects, we as the Dean's Office don't really need to play a role in that. If you have a
Okay.
good conversation with an amenable chair,
Right.
to
But
say,
that's
I'd like to
also-
start earlier to get better letters, then that seems like a fairly good request, right?
Mhm. Okay.
Andrea, did I answer all of your
Yeah,
questions?
yeah, I
Okay,
think so.
good.
I think so.
Just wanted to make
It's
sure
just
there was
that I
any.
think the problem also is that sometimes we have revolving chairs, you know.
Uh-huh.
We have one chair one semester, or one academic year, and then someone else comes in. So it's kind of, I don't know that they always bring each other up to speed exactly
Mhm.
on what's going on.
Mhm.
And so, but anyway, I mean, I think we can have that conversation in our department.
There's a follow-up question to that.
Mhm.
The dean has to approve the referee list, so even if we start early on, would that affect your involvement?
No, because the approval of the list is fairly straightforward.
And it's fluid, so if you started the process, like say this fall, and you want to ensure that you mail letters out in the spring, the department would still send that list of referees that is on the FEC, and it'll still get approved.
Right. So it gets looked at in faculty affairs, I look at it, and then it's just an email approval. So if it's.
I don't think they heard the question
Yeah, can you
in the
repeat that
back.
question?
They didn't hear the question.
So
Would you-
I just wanted to confirm if we started earlier, the FEC work, if this would affect the dean's office involvement, because they have to approve our referee lists, which your office did very promptly, but we also formed our FEC very late, so.
Right.
Yeah, so as you send it, our office and College Dean Stott, he'll approve it, and then you're able to move forward from there.
I think to some extent it's up to the candidates who are the ones who are coming to these meetings to be familiar with the guidelines and then kind of just move their own candidacy through their departments, because you're your best advocate. And if you know from reading the guidelines kind of what the stages are, then then you can say, okay, the first faculty meeting, we need to get an FEC committee set up, in the fall, and then it all kinds of falls into place.
We're really
So
hoping that the
unfortunately-
mentoring system will replace that type of self-driven motivation, or at least enhance it over the coming years. Because I think if you have a really good RTPC member who's gone through the promotional process, who has sort of adopted you as somebody who you've worked carefully with over the years, then that person can really help direct the movement through the department as well.
Ideally, yeah.
Yeah, ideally. And it is varied among the departments. I mean, we're trying. So faculty affairs sends reminders to the chairs at the beginning of each academic year. I send a reminder to the chairs, slightly more sort of personalized one, just make sure there's nobody in your staff or in your instructional cohorts who could be eligible, and that you've overlooked them or something, make sure they're there. So we do send reminders, but I think everybody's got to sort of be, in tune with what's happening, yeah. David?
Concerning the guidelines about the number of years you mentioned, in particular for associate and full professors, so are the strict guidelines, or is it possible to go up earlier if obviously and the faculty and the department feel like all the criteria are satisfied?
So it's fairly loosely defined. It says usually, right? Usually have X number of years experience. But yeah, there's always a case to be made. And again, it's a conversation. I mean, if you can say, I've looked over these criteria and I've done double the amount in half the time, then why not? Have a go. Because there's no, except perhaps a mild dent to one's self-esteem, there's no penalty in being, turned down. Right? So they're guidelines only. Hi.
A related question for research track.
The 9 years, does that include your spend as a postdoc?
Yes, it can do. So, yeah, so again, it's that kind of accumulated time in rank or equivalent, right? So the equivalent is important here. So, you know, I got asked a question not so long ago about somebody who had been in the university for quite a while, but only recently come onto the RTPC track and been doing other forms of, you know, teaching and service. And so it's a case-by-case basis, and in that case, I think it didn't really constitute sufficient grounds for taking a really good evaluative look at the candidate. But if you've been doing similar kinds of work, you know, to all intents and purposes in different institutions or in this one, then absolutely. Yes. Hi.
In section where there are several teaching faculties, is there a maximum of number of faculties that can go up for the same promotion?
I'm glad you asked that, because I meant to tell everybody there is absolutely no quota system, right? I think, I'm not sure, well, you guys tell me whether you've heard this or not, but some people tell me that some people think there's a quota, and there isn't. Absolutely not. If there's any quota, it's either the vestige of some institutional legend that refuses to go away, or it's the department chair saying, I've only got enough, you know, bandwidth to do so many files and I can't be bothered to do yours, right? Which is not a good thing to say, and it's not permissible. You should challenge that if you ever hear that, right? Because essentially, you know, these guidelines, we rewrote them because we want them to be transparent and fair, and most importantly, we want people to use them. Right, we want people to get promoted on the RTPC track. Like I said, you know, our promotion rate is really high. So, you know, they exist to make sure everybody gets looked at in a really fair and equitable way and has an opportunity to express their contributions to the institution. So I want people to move up, right? There's no quota like, oh, I can only afford to promote X number of people a year or something, right? That's not the case. So challenge that wherever you hear it.
Just a question regarding the referees and then the chair of the FEC.
Mm-hmm.
When the chair of the FEC writes to the referees, there's the template letter that's there. In that template letter, it says the CV is attached. Is that the only document one attaches? Because obviously some of the referees, and especially now from assistant to associate, where you have 4 referees to speak to teaching, and that the 2 others may, and the letter says, you know, lists all the criteria and says, does the person, if they were in your institution, would they be able to be promoted to this rank? Now, when they've only known them through conferences and their research or through service committee work, they wouldn't be able to speak to the other criteria. How does...
Well, each letter writer you know, takes on their understanding of the individual through their interactions with them. We've never really had a problem with it, but maybe, I don't know, Kat, what do you think about the template?
In regards to documents that you could submit with the letter, CV you're able to because it's public, people post their CVs online. Any other additional documents that you'd like to submit, you have to get the candidate's permission first. So as long as the candidate's okay with what you're going to send, you can send it.
And I think it's not a bad practice. I mean, I think that, first of all, there are two things here. First of all, candidates should be aware of the referee requirements from day one and should be fostering these types of relationships. So there are very few instances among teaching faculty. I know the research is slightly different. Among teaching faculty where it's a complete surprise that somebody has been contacted, you know. Now, you don't contact them individually before this, but through relationships at conferences and things like that, you build up these types of things so that when a candidate makes suggestions about who might be appropriate candidates, the FEC chair can have some confidence that these are people, the candidate is a known quantity to the referee, you know. Having said that, I think it's very good practice for the candidate to understand on some level, yes, we will send out instances of what's in your file, including your teaching statement and stuff like this, to more fully inform the process for the candidate. And
So
that's right, just ask, yeah, just say the, yeah.
Our candidate invited the letter writers to see the whole dossier on the Dropbox. And so they could see
I thought
that.
they weren't able to know who to to be in any contact with them.
So if they invite them to the Dropbox, then.
Well,
Yeah.
the FEC, but not the candidate him or herself. You're talking about the chair of the committee who can do that.
Yeah, but what Kat's saying that the candidate has to give permission.
But in, like a general, like as they're preparing their dossier and they're bringing up their materials, they can let the determined chair know, these are materials I don't mind you sending to the candidate. As a general,
Okay.
they won't know specifically who's on their referee list
Right.
or anything
So,
like that.
so candidates can propose some names, and we like the chair of the FEC and others to contribute to that as well. And obviously, in the new guidelines, it's rank-on-rank referees too, which in the old guidelines, they can be anybody, but now you have to be at the rank that's being applied to or higher, as with tenure. But then, the candidate is asked not to contact any referees directly, and if you submit, say, 7 names to the pool, you'll use, 3 or 4 of them, right? So that they could have a general sense of who's out there, but not a specific one.
I have a question about those letters, or the referees again, because I think that they're, for, maybe for full, you have to have 5 letters, but you can also have additional letters of support. And how are those additional letters of support solicited? Do you ask, does the FEC just decide, well, let's get a couple more letters?
Yeah,
Or
so that's pretty much what happens. That's what happens in tenure review cases, right? And it's not necessarily an indication that the file is weak or anything, but perhaps there's some aspect of the candidacy that needs a little bit more light shed on it. So they might say, well, let's solicit another couple and see what happens.
I do think that there are instances, and please correct me if the understanding is wrong, where you might, and it takes some good judgment to do this. I've heard people say, can I include student letters in my supplementary materials and things like that, which would be the candidate, him or herself, soliciting that. I don't think there's any prohibition against getting additional letters that support areas of services, things like that, where not the referee letters, but other things. The point is you have to use some rhetorical judgment in when enough is enough.
Right.
You can solicit letters that are not going to further the case at all, that sound as if a special pleading is going on or something like that in terms of student letters and things like that. But I don't think it's prohibited to include additional little memos or something like that in a different part of the file if you want to, but I think people should use good judgment on whether it's
I
valuable or not.
Personally, I don't really like to see student letters personally. There's no prohibition against them, and I'm not a voting member, by the way. So stick your letters in, because I'm not going to vote. So I'm there just ex officio, but I don't like them because there's something, I don't know, it always seems like coercion to me. But Chris, you had a comment.
Yeah, just I think this move to this newer process makes a lot of sense and gives us more agency in terms of how we present ourselves. But I want to ask a question about the feedback loop.
Yes.
Because it seems like if we're changing some things about the preparation of the dossier, it'd be a good time also to look at how does the DCAP committee then respond to both chairs and individuals. So for example, the promotion to assistant, right, is a key recognition of now you're at a certain level of stability, you're kind of at home in the institution now, so then you're building toward associate, right? So would it be a good idea, and do you maybe already do this, to have more feedback in that loop in terms of just from this initial review, the committee would strongly suggest that you focus on this and this in terms of thinking toward your next step. Because clearly we want this to be toward full. Then it's a different conversation when you get to associate.
Yeah, yeah.
Right? Because a lot of people I think are happy to park at associate, right? So then and that also gets to the changing a date for full professor. Because that person has been here long enough that they are in pretty good shape in terms of knowing the lay of the land, right? But I'm curious about the feedback loop. If it's, tell us more about how that feedback loop looks and what maybe could improve it.
So thank you for raising that. It definitely does need to be improved, and we need to make it a little bit more consistent. But what we've talked about in the committee is when candidates get a letter saying that they've been successful in being promoted, is including a paragraph from the memo that goes up to the provost's office recommending their promotion, right? So so when I ask the committee, so we do a vote, and then I ask the committee to write up their discussion for the purposes of a memo that goes forward to the provost's office. I ask them to write it in such a way that it could potentially be excerpted, so that it could be included in a memo that goes to the candidate and to the chair. Now, I don't think we did that this year, did we? We were going to start it this coming year. Yeah, okay. So that will be a part of it. Now, so what we did do this year is I made sure I extended the invitation to speak to every single person who was denied, and I think pretty much universally they all took me up on that. So we were able to have that kind of conversation. But in terms of getting people ready for associate, I think that will be something we'll, or whatever the next level is, that will be something that we'll do in a much more systematic and helpful way this year, because I think it's an excellent suggestion and really helps people think, feel good about getting the promotion, but also give them something to, concrete to use for the next step. Because like I said, we want people to move through this, and we want them to keep getting promoted. So, hi.
Hi. So given that you're now talking about a more explicit connection between the teaching statement and the dossier, would you recommend treating them together like a legal filing is, like where you have your case brief and it is specifically referring to exhibits?
Right, so I don't necessarily, in terms of rhetorical structure, think I would do it in terms of a legal filing, but in essence, yes. Right, you're saying I did this amazing thing in class, and as you can see from the syllabus, attached below or something.
But not like as exhibit. So it just makes it easier.
You could do that if you wanted to organize it that way. That would be fine. That wouldn't be a problem. And this is an evolving process too. So if, as we go through this iteration of the promotion process, we find that being a little bit more structured in that way helps keep everybody on the same page, and that would be good. I mean, one of the things we're hoping to do is actually reduce the size of the dossiers, right? So that you have significant, meaningful evidence rather than just every single piece of paper. Because at the moment, they are a nightmare to wade through, because we print everything out, they look like that. Some people have 2 of those, and I mean, they're a killer. So if we've got, pithy narratives with well-chosen evidence, then that's going to be really helpful for everybody. It's a brief.
I have a question on the chair's letter.
Yeah.
On page 13, there's just a tiny paragraph about the chair's going to write a memo about the discussion within the faculty. Is there anything more you're expecting from the chair's letter?
So we changed this because the chair's letter used to be a reiteration of every single thing in the file, and it was pointless. Right, so the idea is the chair's memo adds anything that we need to know, including something that may be confidential or unknown to the candidate, right? Which is to say, we had a discussion in the faculty, and we voted 5-4, but the people who were against raised this particular objection that you need to know about, right? Now, that's obviously an extreme version in which there might be some controversy, but if there is a piece of information that's missing, that's what the chair would give us.
That's all.
Well, and their endorsement also, right? More generally, but they don't need to reiterate everything, because we used to get these 4 or 5 page letters that just were, in which case, I'll just read that.
Well, it used to be the prime thing of evidence.
Right.
So now it's not.
It's not.
Okay. And also we've asked in anthropology for the regular merit review, teaching evaluations, can it be from anybody in the department, or does it have to be rank on rank?
Okay, so I think it's a department by department decision, and if you have a justification, you're a small faculty, or you can't do rank on rank because you've got 1 full professor, or the full professors never show up, right? Something like that.
They're there.
Yeah, right. Then that.
I think having somebody of rank, as the chair of the committee is oftentimes a good idea, but I think that particularly in large departments, you have lots and lots of things to do, and it's actually good practice, I think, oftentimes for more junior people to look at the files, because oftentimes they're inspirational. I think it's a good socialization in departments.
Yeah, and I think if you have an opportunity as a department to have some level setting of expectations when it comes to things like teaching observations, like maybe dedicate part of a faculty meeting to going through the CET classroom observation checklist, and everybody kind of shared understanding of what that means, then that should be fine.
Yeah, even this year, in fact, the chairs of those committees are being asked to write a brief summary of how they applied the criteria.
Yeah. Right. I have to leave. You guys don't have to. I do what I do. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Thank you. I got to go. So, all right. Thank you very much. By the way, everybody, if you have questions, you can email me and I'd be happy to answer them. My email address is astott, astott@usc.edu.
Thanks, Kip. Always appreciate it.